Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is my twice weekly live webcast. It's October the 22nd, it's Sunday. It's a very nice day outside at the moment, unbroken blue sky, which is nice to see. So what have I got for you in today's show? Well, sadly a rider died in a crash which happened in heavy rain from Storm Babette. More on that in a moment. Met Police, they have a driver under investigation after another motorcyclist was killed, but this time in a blue light crash. Another London council is proposing huge motorcycle parking charges. I know a lot of people don't like stories from London, but if it happens here, it sooner or later arrives out of London. Another council, sorry, I've just done that one, haven't I? ARC, the behind the vector, they are getting government funding, which is an interesting decision. Safety comes at a price with mirror extenders. We'll have a quick look at those. And Honda's 2011 RCE electric concept motorcycle has resurfaced in a patent application. What isn't a patent application but appears to be on the cards is 180 horsepower Multistrada V4 RS from Ducati, which is an interesting motorcycle by any stretch of the imagination. Now, finally, how should riders get access to bikes like this? Do the MCIA's proposals for bike license changes actually benefit riders? Take a long look at the MCIA, Motorcycle Industry Association's proposals for these license changes at the end of the show. So grab yourself a biscuit and a cup of tea or something, settle yourself down. Don't forget, if you've got a question, comment, anything you want to say or ask, I'm very happy to try to respond to those online if I possibly can, and I'll get back to you after the show if I can't. And we also have Clive and Adam to welcome too. So nice to see you guys. Nigel, sorry, not Adam. Why did I say Adam? Because I know somebody else called Adam, that's right. Right, okay, so on with the show then. First things first, let's just get the weather out of the way. Now, the clear up after Storm Babette is going to take quite a while. Here in London we actually missed the worst of the rain, although I will say that when I say we missed the worst of it, we had 24 hours of pretty much continuous rain, an absolute torrential downpour overnight on Friday, which woke me up several times. So it's not been totally without rain down here, but it's nothing compared to what's happened across other parts of the country. There's flooding as far as I can see everywhere from Essex through Derbyshire, Yorkshire, and right up, of course, into Scotland, where they had the worst of the rain. Now, the bad news is the rain will continue over the course of the week. There will be wet periods, there will be heavy showers at times, there will be breaks, but with the ground as saturated as it will be after Babette, it's going to cause more issues, I suspect. That's the forecast anyway. And of course, it will take quite a long time to clear up. There is going to be silt over roads where they flooded. There's going to be mud washed out of fields into the road over wide parts of the country, and of course where the worst of the flooding has happened, there'll also likely be damage to road surfaces. So be careful if you are out there on the bike, and do keep an eye on the weather forecast for further rain and further flooding. Right, okay, on with the news then. And the first story that I want to share with you today is a sad one, because a motorcyclist has died following a collision with a car in Basingstoke. Now, this happened around 5:30 on Thursday evening. That was as the first of the heavy rain bands associated with Storm Babette crossed the area. Now, a yellow warning for rain was in place at the time, and Hampshire police said the rider, a man in his 50s, was pronounced dead at the scene. Sadly, another motorcyclist has died following a collision with a police car. Now, the Met police officer involved in this fatal collision is under investigation for potential offences, including causing death by dangerous driving and causing death by careless or inconsiderate driving. Christopher de Carvalho Guedes, he was a Brazilian national. He was turning right on his motorcycle when an officer drove through a red light on the way to an emergency call. The police vehicle was marked. It did have its lights and sirens on at the moment of the collision, which happened in Enfield in North London around 3 p.m. on October the 12th. And sadly, the 26-year-old died in hospital the following day. The Met Police referred themselves to the Independent Office of Police Conduct. They have begun an investigation, and the office is also being investigated for potential gross misconduct. Right, so sad stories there. Kevin's looked in, Aaron's looked in, and Aaron offers his condolences to those riders and their families. Yes, indeed, we would all do that, I think. Right, okay, so what else have we got to talk about? Excuse me. Well, I have warned you that where one council leads the way, others are pretty much bound to follow, and the latest council to propose scrapping free motorcycle parking bays is Camden. And just like the proposals for Hackney, the charges would hit motorcycle users pretty darn hard in the pocket. So, not too surprisingly, the Save London Motorcycle Group, excuse me, they say that this is the fourth time Camden Council has proposed charges for motorcycle parking. The group says that the council provided very little information, and what they have provided is unclear, but as they understand it, the charges would be as follows. So solo motorcycle parking bays would be £2.60 per day, or £2 if you have an electric motorcycle. Parking permits for residents, businesses and doctors would be charged at the same rate as a car. Residence permits would nearly double for these vehicles, from £75 a year to £146 a year, with a astonishing £7 off, only £139 if you're parking an electric vehicle. And if you have a business, then a motorcycle parking permit would be £419 per year, with a doctor's permit at £326, which seems astonishing to me. But assuming you have to park in a bay 5 days a week for 46 days a year, then the cost of parking for you annually would be £600 a year. Any other provisions? Well, there are. If you happen to be unfortunate enough to live in a car-free development, you will not be allowed to buy a parking permit. So you'd have to find a bay to park in, and you'd have to pay your £2.60 solo motorcycle charge every single day of the year, which adds up to £950 a year, which is more than it costs to park a diesel car, incidentally, in these bays. Now, elsewhere, residents would only be allowed one single parking permit, so if you have a bike and you have a car and you need to park them on the street, then you'd be forced to choose between them. And what's more, permits would be zoned, so having a residence permit in one part of the borough wouldn't allow you to park in motorcycle parking bays in different parts of the borough. Now, on the plus side, it does appear that Camden no longer plan to impose maximum stay limits in solo motorcycle bays or £6 an hour charges for commuters from outside the borough. But the BMF, who've got involved now, say it's a misguided and illogical strategy given the significant congestion and CO2 reduction benefits which motorcycles offer. They also, of course, point out, just like the Save London Motorcycle Group have done, that motorcycles do not take up large amounts of road or curb space and do not require significant and expensive parking infrastructure to accommodate them. Though I would dispute that final point because actually secure bike parking would prevent a lot of theft. So I think the BMF need to get behind secure parking there. Consultation is running to the 5th of November. So if you want to put a firework underneath them, you do have plenty of time to do that. But I do wonder how long it's going to take councils outside London to start bringing in their own proposals for parking charges like this. Right, okay. Anything else I just wanted to say quickly? Don't forget, if you do enjoy the show, you can head over to my YouTube channel, Survival Schools UK over there, and you can view all the old shows, and you can also set yourself a reminder to get an update for new shows which go out Wednesdays and Sundays at 11, nearly always live, occasionally recorded and very rarely I will miss a show due to other engagements. And if you go across to look at my coffee page today as well, you'll also find I put a short article up there on how to view YouTube without the adverts. If you're viewing recorded shows on YouTube, you'll know probably that there are ads all the way through them, and YouTube have now put an ad blocker up, so I can tell you how to enable your ad blocker to block the YouTube advert blocker, if you see what I mean. Head over to coffee, you'll find that article over there. All right, okay, on with the news then. Well, Arc Vehicle, they're the company behind the £100,000 Arc Vector electric motorcycle. They've announced that they have received backing from the UK government's Development for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy department, and also the Office for Low Emission Vehicles via an outfit called Innovate UK. Now, exactly what the backing consists of, how much it is, hasn't been revealed, but the press release says that the company is working to develop a new dual motor with integrated inverter. Arc are also said to be working on new battery technology for the next generation of electric motorcycles, and they're also said to be working on 2 new bikes as well as a side-by-side ATV. Now, frankly, I'd like to see them just get one model on the road and delivered to customers other than Ryan Reynolds before they get distracted by additional models and additional projects, but hey ho. What do I know? The BMF actually tend to agree with me, because their chairman, Jim Freeman, he said that he thought the proof of the pudding would be in results. Quote, "We hear of technical developments in EVs on a monthly basis. This sounds like another. Anything which improves the power to weight ratio of an e-bike sounds like good news. Translated into range rather than performance would be a welcome step." He added, "It still doesn't do anything for infrastructure though. Just remember to charge outside your home." And I'd add that it does nothing for the affordability of electric bikes for ordinary users either, as Arc continue to punt them out to purchases, prospective purchases, at £100,000 a pop. So we're forever being sold products on the grounds of safety. And last time out, I looked at the poor performance of ladies' leggings and jeggings, and I would advise you, if you have such clothing, to go back and look at the last show. Their protective function is compromised by being made from knitted fabric, which basically fails very badly under the MotoCap testing regime when they look at abrasion resistance. Now, I got an ad through the post, as it were, for mirror extenders, these little things here. And again, safety is the plug for them. Quote, "Every motorcyclist understands that when it comes to safety, vision is vital. R&G's all new mirror wideners help to increase the distance between mirrors, improving rider view and reducing fatigue." So that's what you get for your money. And in one way, I can't disagree that all too often the original equipment mirrors on a motorcycle often they offer a fine view of the elbows, but little more. And I would say too that these incredibly easy to install extenders do what they say, but this safety comes at a price. You get an admittedly neatly finished item, but basically it's simply a chunk of metal with 2 holes in, one to drop a bolt into the existing mirror mount and the second hole to screw the existing mirror into. So does that sound like something worth a starting price of £30? Not to me, it doesn't. And the fact is, you can head over to AliExpress and you can get something very similar over there for, well, as you can see the price on there. You know, even if you're not prepared to go and take a bit of a punt on waiting for something to non-appear from China after a few weeks, you can go to eBay and you can get very similar items for under a tenner. So I'm kind of, I don't mind businesses turning a profit. That's what we're all here for, if we're, running a business of some sort, and I admit that I am. But sometimes the markup on items like this is just silly. I'd be very interested to hear your comments on this, by the way, because I think basically a lot of bike kit like that is just a complete rip-off. Right, okay, on to electric motorcycles. Now, electric bikes have been around rather longer than just the last couple of years, although of course that's when we have heard of them. And for example, Zero have a decade of history, I believe. There have been other attempts to get electric startups launched. I recall the AA actually having a small fleet of electric motorcycles in London, and that was getting on for 20 years ago. But many have come, blazed briefly like a comet, and then gone again. And one such bike was the Honda RCE. Now, this was actually a concept bike. It was showcased at the 2011 Tokyo Motor Show, and it was said to be an electric motorcycle inspired by Honda's 1960 GP bikes. Now, of course, a decade ago, electric motorcycles really weren't a priority, and the RCE did what many concepts do, disappeared at the end of the show, never to be seen again. Until just a few days ago, when a new Honda patent application, the drawing of which you can see here, appears to reveal that certain elements of that RCE motorcycle are actively under development within Honda. Now, the patent image is next to identical with the original bikes and machines layout. Let's just zoom in a little bit. The motor is mounted concentric with the front sprocket, so basically under the rider's, just ahead of the rider's seat there. And the advantage of that, of course, is that just like some bimotors, what you then do is you eliminate chain tension changes with suspension movement. The straight push rear shock gets lined up to feed its stresses almost directly into the beam of the frame, which runs under the petrol tank. The drawings indicate that Honda have used 3 battery packs, one under that fake petrol tank. A second is where the conventional engine would be mounted, so directly under that first one, under the frame. And the third is shaped to fit into the belly pan. Now, we already know that Honda have some fairly ambitious plans to launch a range of electric PTWs on fairly short order, but the only one we've currently seen is the short range and low powered moped, which is hardly going to set the world alight. So just possibly the RCE patent points towards an electric sports bike from the company. Now, I've got a couple of comments here. Clive says RMG are high quality, it's great kit but expensive, and says you get what you pay for. I don't disagree entirely, but ask yourself, where do RMG source their parts from? I very much doubt they are drop forged somewhere in the UK. Aaron agrees that you pay a bit extra for the RMG, and he says that for something like that, AliExpress is perfect. Yeah, I mean, it's not a high stress part, is it? You're basically bolting a mirror to it. Kevin said that he considered mirror extenders, but aesthetics are questionable. Well, if I can see where I'm going, I don't worry too much about aesthetics. But frankly, I do think they are priced very high. That's what Kevin says too. Right, okay, so where are we now? Well, back in the 1970s, the Ducati V-twins, they had a reputation for being modestly powered but light and nimble, and Desmo valves aside, they're relatively simple to work on too. But I have to say that Colin Chapman's old Lotus motto, simplify and add lightness, hardly applies to the current Ducati range, which seems to be getting more high-tech and heavier by the moment. Now, as if the multi V4 Pikes Peak edition wasn't enough, it's rumoured that something is even more radical and in the works. And photos have allegedly escaped from a dealer meeting, and they reveal that Ducati could be working on an even more powerful machine. And this is it seen in the picture here. Let's just zoom in a little bit for you, give you a closer view. This is said to be the Ducati Multistrada V4S, and it's said to take the chassis from the Pikes Peak model, with a single-sided swinging arm. That doesn't actually look like a single-sided swinging arm to me, but hey ho, that's apparently what the bike is going to get. You get 17-inch wheels, rather than the, I think it's a 1917 combination. And then you bolt in the Desmo Sedici Stradale V4 engine from the Street Fighter V4 SP2, and you get add a dry clutch to it, and then you have the Multistrada V4 RS. Now, apparently, as I say, it's a leaked photo, but there are some well-informed rumours in the Italian motorcycle press which suggest that the bike will be tamed to just 180 horsepower, but by fitting the optional full Akrapovic system, you can release no less than 195 horsepower. Mind you, one thing they do apparently have shed from the bike is the rails for the side cases, so you'll have to make do without luggage on this particular machine. Now, it does remind me, bikes like this, it wasn't too many years ago that the Motorcycle Industry Association, the MCIA, opined that it was sports bikes that were the problem in the UK, that they were overpowered, ridden by underskilled riders, and thus overrepresented in crashes. Now, the answer, they said, was for riders to switch to sensible adventure bikes that were more manageable. I don't see them rushing out to say anything about the current crop of 160 horsepower adventure bikes. And that brings me neatly to my in-depth point today. Now, this comes back to the MCIA's proposal for a root and branch overhaul of the powered light vehicle L1 to L7 license categories that include motorcycles, but also three-wheelers, light quadricycles and heavy quadricycles. Now, introducing the MCIA's new action plan for motorcycle license, the MCIA, Motorcycle Industry Association, I'll just remind you, they say the current process is, quote, burdensome, intimidating and expensive, hindering entry. There needs to be simplification in order to reduce barriers while enhancing safety. So remember that, reducing barriers, enhancing safety. And the organisation points to the failure of the current tiered motorcycle license system to reduce casualties as it was hoped to. And they can point to the statistical evidence because since 2011 the deaths and serious injuries, which had previously been falling pretty steadily since about 1980, have essentially flatlined. But as I also explained on Wednesday, laying the issue at the door of the EU and the third European driving licence directive is being a bit economical with the truth. The EU directive always left the door open for member states to use a training option to upgrade a full motorcycle licence rather than the tiered system that we have in the UK. There was always the option for a rider to pass a test on 125 at 17, then move up to an A2 licence at 19 via an upgrade course rather than a separate DVSA test, and also they could have moved to the full power A licence after 2 years via training again. So it was a combination of the government, the DFT and the DSA, as they were at the time, that decided on the requirement for a test at each step. Now, as I explained last show, that option to progress via training is still there in the EU directive. If you want to catch up with that, you can head to my Focus on Friday post, whatever happened to tiered training, and if you missed it, you can read it over there, or of course you can actually read the or watch the previous show if you prefer. But anyway, you got the option there. The link is just coming up in the comment stream now. Right, so let's just have a quick reminder of the current system. CBT, compulsory basic training. New riders must complete a CBT course that allows them to ride small motorcycles and scooters with L plates. Now, the AM license, this is at 16. Riders can obtain their AM moped license, which permits them to ride bikes up to a maximum power output of 2 kilowatts. They can ride that on L plates, or they can take an AM license test and get a full license for a moped, which you won't be astonished to know hardly anybody bothers with. Now, at 17, riders can obtain the A1 light motorcycle license that allows you to ride a motorcycle with a maximum power output of 11 kilowatts, which is about 14.6 horsepower. The A2 license, that comes in at age 19. Riders can get that A2 license, and now they can move up to the sort of middleweight class of motorcycles, the up to 35 kilowatt, 46.6 horsepower, roughly speaking. Now, if they pass that test, 2 years later, they can take the full A license test. So they could, in theory, get that license at 21. Or you can just wait till 24, do CBT, take your test on the big bike, and do direct access straight into the bigger license. So the system isn't actually all that complicated, but what it does require is multiple tests. You have to take the Module 1 and the Module 2 test for every class you move up. And of course, the other big problem is that the test pass at the A1 license level is take a test on a 125, get a full license for a 125. So there's very little incentive to actually come off L plates, and around just 1,000 riders every year take the A1 test. So what are the specific proposals that the MCIA want to make to change this? Well, let's just bring in this graphic here. I'll just zoom in on that and run down it so you can see it. There we go. At age 14, basically they want to introduce a new low power mobility class which would cover step scooters, low powered sort of sub moped electric vehicles. So that would be age 14. They want to bring those into line with the sort of the motorcycle licensing system. Not a bad idea, frankly. People are using these things illegally. Make them part of the system. It would make more sense than trying to ban them, I think. Anyway, moving on, then the moped class remains the same. You come into that at 16 and you can ride a moped on L plates, but the big difference here is that they want a rider who at 16 takes a test on a moped to get access to ride an 11 kilowatt 125. So rather than being stuck on a moped, you would move up to what's currently the 125 learner bike. Now at 17, you have some more radical changes coming in, and let me explain how this works. Currently, you can ride that 11 kilowatt 125 on L plates, and if you pass your test, you get that pass a test on a 125, get a license for a 125 result. But the MCIA want you to be able to access a 22 kilowatt machine at 17 if you pass the A1 test. Next, they want the current 35 kilowatt A2 class license to be accessed a year earlier at 18 rather than 19 with a test pass. And then they want the full power A unlimited class to be accessed 2 years after passing an A2 test. So in theory, you could access that at 20, or directly via direct access at 21, which is a full 3 years sooner than the current system. So essentially what these proposals do at every step is put younger riders onto more powerful motorcycles. So let's have a quick look at what's proposed for the youngest riders, because this again is important. Here on the left you can see the current process for the youngest riders. You have to take a CBT, and as the diagram implies, you can repeat that every 2 years. So if you want to, you can just sit there on CBT. Under the new proposals though, you would have to take a theory test before you could even do CBT, which frankly I don't think that's a bad idea at all. But the problem is, whilst it enables or it stops the perpetual professional CBTer, the new system steps you through CBT to be taken once and then valid for 2 years. After 2 years you take this CBT plus, which they haven't defined, and that's valid for a maximum of 2 years. And then it said that they would improve their skills rather than maintain their current level, because they'd have to take this CBT plus. And then after 2 years, riders on the CBT plus will have to go on to take a final assessment carried out at an A2B, but this would give them your full license. So where's the problem? Well, basically what the start of it is, it puts 16 years and 17-year-old riders onto the road with exactly the same CPT course we have now. And it's not until they have been riding on the road for 2 years that they must take their CPT plus. Now this, as I say, is said to be intended to prevent CPTs being renewed ad infinitum, but the new sort of allegedly safer system still leaves the most vulnerable learners exposed on the roads with a totally inadequate level of preparation for 2 years. Now, in my experience as a CPT instructor, and I have said this many times, that the CPT, essentially unchanged over 3 decades, is totally inadequate on modern roads. And the idea that riders improve their skills post CPT is pretty faulty. The research has shown that inexperienced riders are more prone to crashes, as easily shown by numerous research papers. Where the thinking goes wrong here is that since inexperienced riders are more prone to crashes, delaying their access to higher powered motorcycles until they have gained experience somehow improves safety. The statistics suggest it's not the case, and that novice riders crash. They have novice crashes basically whatever they ride, and frankly, a 60 mile per hour crash on a 125cc bike is just as likely to be fatal as a 60 mile per hour crash on a 1250cc bike. So the truth is this: the first couple of years are an experience riders have to learn to survive, and unfortunately lessons learned are often the wrong ones. Now, there are good reasons for getting riders properly trained before letting them out on the road. There is evidence that training does improve things, but it won't be achieved by failing to improve CPT for these youngest riders. If the MCIA frankly want a credible starting point, it would be to create that greatly enhanced CPT plus, as they call it, as the very first step, not as an upgrade after 2 years. But frankly, why are we letting partially trained riders on the road in the first place? The DVSA test is the real test of competence. You won't pass the DVA test after CPT. So it's as simple as you won't do it. You have to be really, really lucky to pass the DVSA test. That's why when we run training courses for new riders, we put them through several more days of training before we put them in for the test. So a rider who's passed the bike test may not be expert by any stretch of the imagination, but they can deal with most hazards they will encounter on the road quite competently, and that's something that you simply cannot achieve after 2 hours or so on a CPT road ride. Who knows what CPT Plus will entail, but clearly it's not intended to replace training to the bike test. And beyond that, the test is independent. It's an assessment fully outside the training school. So it's always a good idea to have independent assessments rather than in-house assessments for very obvious reasons. So yeah, I still think leaving the test with the DVSA is a good idea. Now, eliminating the need to take this motorcycle test to gain the full A1 license would also leave motorcyclists the only group of powered road users not subject to an official test in front of a DFT examiner. Now, as I pointed out last week, CPT instructors do have legal powers to validate a provisional license up to a CPT level, but stretching that to issue a driving license and to claim that this is actually going to be the same standard as the DVSA set is questionable for all sorts of quality control reasons. Right, so what are the bigger picture then? Well, what comes next? Well, as I've said, after completing CPT, CPT Plus and the riding assessment at a suitable approved training school, and having ditched the L plates, the MCIA believe the learner should be allowed to ride a 22 horsepower bike, which you can see there in the sort of middle top of the picture there. Now, 22 kilowatts doesn't sound like a great deal in these days of 180 horsepower multi-stradas, but it is actually about 30 horsepower. Now, there's an argument that a 22 kilowatt bike would be safer on faster roads, but it would also put our youngest riders on the sort of bikes that I grew up around myself, the 90 horsepower RD, 90 mile per hour RD 250, for example. That was putting out around about 30 horsepower, so certainly 85, 90 miles per hour would be the top speed of these bikes. And my generation used to zip around on those and frankly crash them with alarming frequency because they hadn't got much in the way of training either. And that's why the 125 limit was introduced in the first place in 1982, I think it was, along with the old Part 1 off-road training assessment. Now, the big question really is this. Are the MCIA statements, would they improve the safety of riders? Are they credible statements? Well, I see nothing here that underpins that. And to be honest, and speaking as a former direct access trainer, it's hard to see how taking away that formal test of riding ability would actually achieve higher standards. And the fact is, and you know, it's sad to have to say this really, as the mouthpiece for the bike industry in the UK, the MCIA's goal is to sell bikes and sell anything to do with bikes and to make money from motorcycling and from motorcyclists. It always has been, period. As far as I can see, there's nothing stopping a 17-year-old here from taking CBT one day, CBT plus the next, and on day 3 passing that riding school assessment and getting access to that 22 kilowatt 30 horsepower bike. Now I'd hope that taking those 3 courses one after the other would result in a much better trained 17-year-old taking to the roads than we did in my day. But if you want to get radical with safety, if safety really was behind the MCIA's proposal, then there is a simple way to do this, and that is to remove the dispensation to ride unaccompanied on the road on a motorcycle on L plates. Simple as that. Get new riders through the A1 motorcycle test before they are allowed to ride on the road. It's what new drivers have to do. Now, anything else to comment on? Well, the MCIA seems to have forgotten or ignored that provision within the third driving license directive for the successive steps once the 125 license test has been taken to move up via the training option. And that alone would provide an incentive for riders to acquire a 125 A1 license. Now the MCIA say it's a process that would make attaining a moped, motorcycle or other L category vehicle license less complex, less costly, more accessible to a broader section of society. Well, I'm struggling to see how it would be less costly. There's still that requirement to repeat CBT 2 years after the first by taking the CBT plus. The license assessment now becomes a compulsory to do after 4 years maximum, so you can't keep simply resitting CBT. And one thing that the DVSA did do a few years ago was to allow for simplified CBTs for repeat takers. So effectively what you're doing is you're moving the license assessment away from the DVSA and their pocket and putting the work into the training schools remit and putting the cash that the riders will undoubtedly have to pay for this assessment into the training school's bank account. And I really don't see how much the MCIA's system simplifies things either. Now, at this point, a very cynical person might recall that the MCIA have a motorcycle training arm. It's called the Motorcycle Industry Training Association, or MCITA. And it's through the MCITA that the MCIA themselves have been angling to take control of rider training schools by calling on the government to recognise that the MCITA linked schools are actually operating to a higher standard than ordinary training schools, although there's no external evidence to suggest anything such. Now, training schools have to pay to join this association, then the school has to agree to abide by their code of conduct, and their school trainers have to pass the various in-house assessments, as far as I know too. So it wouldn't take a huge leap to see that what might be coming next is that the MCIA might propose that it's their own training association, which is the one that's perfectly placed to provide the instructors to oversee this new legal license assessment to replace the 125 bike test. And of course, what's unwritten is that every training school is not a member of the MCITA. In fact, the majority aren't. So they would presumably be left out in the cold, unable to conduct these assessments, and possibly even not even being allowed to conduct the training leading to it either. So why now? Why is all this coming out now? Well, it's Brexit, of course, isn't it? The MCIA say that now the UK has left the EU, we believe it's the right time to review the current training, testing and licensing system for PLVs in line with EU requirements and the 1963 Vienna Convention, as care must be taken to ensure mutual recognition of licensing as far as possible. Now, right now, the UK's licence structure is aligned with EU licences. That's why you don't need an international driving permit to drive in Europe. That was one of the very first things that they sorted out after the Brexit was done. So you can exchange your licence if you want to. Actually, I better check that up, but you can certainly drive in Europe and vice versa. So take away this alignment and the EU could refuse to recognise a UK motorcycle licence. In fact, that's essentially what that paragraph about remaining in line with the 1963 Vienna Convention is all about, because that is what underpins international driving licences, as I understand it. Now, at my most charitable, one could argue that the MCI have never intended this framework to be a sort of definitive, on the table, what we want and what must be accepted proposal, but actually to represent a starting point for a dialogue, and that the aim is actually to get the debate going. And that may be the case, because frankly I think these proposals are pie in the sky. I don't think there's any way on earth that the DFT will be moved to let motorcyclists skip the official driving test through this assessment idea and become the only group of road users who get a full license to use the road without having to go in front of a DVSA examiner. I just don't think it's going to happen. Rather more surprisingly is that the fact that the National Motorcyclist Council, who include organisations like the BMF, could actually align with it. I think it's interesting. The BMF, of course, have recently withdrawn from FEMA, that's the European Motorcyclists Association, because they point out that as the UK is not in Europe anymore, then FEMA no longer has any relevance to the UK, except, of course, that EU legislation will continue to impact the UK, and it'll certainly impact UK riders who go to Europe. I'm also interested to see that MAG have spoken out fairly negatively about these proposals. MAG actually quit the National Motorcyclist Council fairly soon after it was set up, and they have said that they don't believe that they're credible either. Now, speaking honestly as two, the final point that the MCIA and of course the National Motorcyclist Council who supported it made is that motorcyclists encouraging motorcycling helps the move towards net zero. Now, it's almost entirely irrelevant within the context of changing the licensing system. So summing up, license to net zero, these proposals are called, I think they have zero chance of ever becoming legislation. Right, okay. Aaron has a comment here. He says, simple, sounds complex to me. In NZ, technically we allow 16-year-olds on any lamb's bike. That's sort of 47, is it 47 kilowatts or, yeah, something like that. Yeah, 60 odd horsepower, isn't it, I think. Does rely on personal responsibility, and I only suggest the bigger bikes to guys who grew up on the farm and rode around the paddocks on 250 plus dirt bikes. And of course, most of your roads are rather quieter than those we have in the UK too. But I agree, these are not simple proposals. They do not make the system as it stands simpler, and I don't think it will benefit motorcyclists either. I simply think that the benefit is all for the MCIA. That's nailed it. My colours to the master. You may or may not agree with me. I'll be interested, as always, to see what you have to say. Right, that is it for today. We are at the bottom of the show now. The one thing I do want to do before I go is just to say thank you to this week's supporters. They are Leslie, who bought a book yesterday, Damo, Clive, Paul, Brian and Christine. Thank you all very much indeed for your ongoing support. It all helps to keep these shows coming. And if you're not yet a supporter, why not pop over to my coffee page and take a look. It's likely to be the biggest source of better riding information anywhere on the internet, and there's everything over there from free articles to downloadable copies of some of my paperbacks at a reduced price. So pop over there, have a look and see what's on offer. Right, that really is it for today. Thank you very much indeed. Very much appreciate everybody who looks into these shows, of course. And don't forget, if you are out there on the bike today, remember that we have had some pretty terrible weather around over much of the UK, so roads will not be in the finest state ever. If you check out my article on Saturday, it just coincidentally out to be all about dealing with mud on the road. So if you are out there, make sure you stay shiny side up.